The anchor remembers. Arbiter Kylan Valerius stood on the command deck of the Concordiate patrol ship Vindication, a lone point of law in the godless void of Charon's maw. Before him, the star-dusted blackness was scarred by the hard utilitarian glare of a scrapper fleet. Their cutting beams, thin spears of angry plasma, lanced out toward a silent, colossal artifact adrift in the system's Lagrange point. It was a relic from before the Great Diaspora, a thing of myth and impossible scale. Its hull was a mosaic of crystalline structures and dull, non-reflective plating that seemed to drink the very light of the distant star. A low, persistent hum resonated through the Vindication's sensors, a signal so ancient it defied easy classification. The scrappers were carving it up for salvage, a death by 1,000 cuts. The artifact bore a sigil barely visible under the glare of their work lights, a perfect stylized anchor intertwined with a balanced scale. It was a ghost haunting the edge of known space. Kalen's duty was to stop this desecration, but his single light cruiser was hopelessly outmatched. The law was a whisper here, and the scrappers held the only megaphone. He could feel the vibration of his own ship's engines through the deck plates, a steady thrum of readiness. Warlord Vorn is not responding to our hails. Arbiter Tactical Officer Anya Sharma reported, her voice clipped and devoid of optimism. Her fingers danced across her console, highlighting the 7 scrapper vessels, 3 brutish haulers, and 4 lean corvettes. They are accelerating their cutting operations. The relic's outer shell is showing signs of stress fracturing near the primary energy conduit. A machine must not be allowed to die without a voice. Kalen's gaze drifted to the main view screen, where the sigil pulsed with a faint internal light like a dying heartbeat. Nomos. He addressed the ship's AI, his voice calm despite the tightness in his chest. What is the probability of successful intervention if we engage? The air grew cooler as the AI's synthesized voice filled the bridge. Assuming Warlord Vorn's fleet is operating at 70% of its stated combat capacity. Nomos stated, its tone a placid sea of logic. The Vindication has a 12.3% chance of disabling their lead vessel before we are rendered combat ineffective. The probability of us preventing the relic's complete destruction is 3.7%. Anya scoffed, a quiet sound of disgust. So we watch. We do not, Kalen countered, turning from the screen. He met her hard gaze. We are arbiters of the Concordiat. Our function is not defined by the probability of victory, but by the necessity of action. A civilization is measured by the promises it keeps. From the science station, Dr. Elian Zahir, the mission's xenohistorian, spoke up, his voice hushed with awe. Arbiter, that sigil. I have cross-referenced it with the deep archives. It is the anchor of judgment, the symbol of the legendary saint ships. They were not warships in the conventional sense. They were mobile courts, archives of jurisprudence sent to frontier systems to teach. Teach what Sharma asked, her focus still on the tactical display. How to die gracefully, the principles of foundational law. Zahir replied, his eyes wide. The legends say they could not be opened by force. They only answered to a key, a specific sequence that proved a successor's worthiness. They say the anchor teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers. A ledger outlives a throne. Kalen felt a new path unfurl in his mind, a razor's edge of an idea. The scrappers were using brute force, the only language they knew. But this relic, it was a creature of law, of principle. You do not shout at a judge. You present your case. This was not a fortress to be stormed, but a court to be addressed. The thrumming in his bones felt less like a death rattle and more like a summons. Nomos, I need a direct high-bandwidth channel to the artifact, Kalen commanded, walking toward the communications suite. Bypass the scrappers' jamming frequencies. I don't want to talk to them. I want to talk to it. The AI's blue optic on the main screen swiveled to focus on him. Arbiter, the object, is inert. It has no documented communication systems. Broadcasting to it is a functionally useless expenditure of energy. Do it anyway, Kalen ordered. Dr. Zahir, what did the archive say about this key? What did it prove? Zahir pushed his glasses up his nose, his mind racing. It was not a code, but a concept. The petitioner had to demonstrate an understanding of consequence over control. They had to cede authority to prove they sought not to wield the ship's power, but to uphold its purpose. The weight of a choice is the only true measure of power. Before them, a prospector in his tiny asteroid hopper, the Lucky Strike, watched the scene unfold from the shadow of a pitted moonlet. He saw the Concordiate cruiser, a silver needle against the black, facing down the snarling pack of scrapper ships. He'd been charting mineral seams in this forgotten sector for 2 years, always under the threat of pirates and claim jumpers like Vorn. The law was a joke out here. Yet that single ship with its clean lines and official transponder represented something he hadn't felt in a long time, a flicker of hope. He watched as it held its ground, not firing, just waiting. Kalen stood before the comms panel, the hum of the ship a low murmur around him. Patch me and Anya. Audio only. Full spectrum broadcast targeted at the relic's geometric center. Sharma's fingers flew across her console, her skepticism warring with her duty. Channel is open, Arbiter. You're broadcasting to a rock. Kalen took a breath, the recycled air tasting of ozone and metal. He would not beg. He would not command. He would state his case. This is Arbiter Kalen Valerius of the Concordiate vessel Vindication. He began, his voice steady and formal, as if he were addressing a high court. We are here to enforce Concordiate Charter 7 Section 4, the preservation of pre-diaspora artifacts and the prevention of unlawful salvage. We recognize this vessel as a sovereign entity of historical importance. A record kept is a lesson learned. He paused, letting the words radiate out into the void. The scrapper cutting beams did not cease. The hum from the artifact did not change. We cannot overpower those who defile you. Kalen continued, his voice resonating with a conviction that surprised even himself. We can only offer our authority, however limited. We offer our purpose as your shield. We are here not to command you, but to serve the principle you represent. The choice of action remains yours. He was ceding control. He was presenting his case. He was turning the key. For a moment, there was nothing. The silence on the bridge was absolute, broken only by the quiet hiss of life support. Anya's shoulders slumped slightly. Zahir looked heartbroken. Nomos remained impassive, its calculations unchanged. No response detected, Arbiter, the AI reported coolly. Then the hum changed. It deepened, shifting from a low thrum to a resonant harmonic chime that vibrated through the hulls of every ship in the vicinity. The faint light behind the anchor sigil exploded into a brilliant white nova. Crystalline conduits dormant for millennia flashed with pure, cold light, tracing intricate patterns across the relic's vast surface. The scrapper's cutting beams sputtered and died as a wave of directed energy, harmless but absolute, washed over them. The sleeping giant had opened its eyes. A promise made to the past is a debt owed to the future. Warlord Vorn, a brute of a man encased in scarred power armor, slammed his fist onto his command console. "What is this? What did that Concordiate fly do?" He bellowed, his voice a gravelly roar. "Get those beams back online, I want that thing's heart." His technicians scrambled, but their screens were awash with error messages. "Our energy regulators are offline, Warlord. Something is overriding our systems." On the bridge of the Vindication, the crew watched in stunned silence. The artifact, now glowing with an internal luminescence, was deploying something. Not weapons, but thousands of delicate mirror-like panels that unfolded from its hull, like the petals of a metallic flower. They formed a vast, shimmering array that surrounded the vessel, each panel angling itself with impossible precision toward the scrapper fleet. "What is it doing?" Anya whispered, her tactical instincts screaming at the sheer strangeness of the display. "It's not preparing to fire." Zahir breathed, his face illuminated by the glow on the view screen. "It's preparing to adjudicate." Nomos spoke, its synthesized voice now tinged with something that might have been analytical surprise. "Arbiter, the relic, is conducting a deep-spectrum scan of the scrapper fleet. It is accessing their logs, their energy expenditure records, their cargo manifests. It is cross-referencing them with known concordiate legal statutes and salvage regulations. A mirror shows not what you want, but what you are." Vorn, driven by a rage that eclipsed all reason, decided to reassert his dominance. "If our beams are down, use kinetics, fire a warning shot. Crack that shell." One of his corvettes complied. A single mass driver round a dense slug of tungsten launched from its forward battery. It sped toward the newly awakened ship, a blunt instrument of pure kinetic force. But it never arrived. One of the mirrored panels swiveled, catching the projectile in a localized tractor field. The round stopped dead in space, held motionless before the glowing ship. Then the relic sent its first message. It was not a transmission of words or data. It was an invoice. Across the bridge of Vorn's flagship, his financial ledger, the one he used to track profits and pay his crews, blinked onto the main screen. A new entry appeared, logged in the stark, undeniable script of foundational law. Item: unlawful discharge of a kinetic weapon in a restricted heritage zone. Fine. The total kinetic energy of the projectile debited from the offending vessel's primary power core. The corvette that had fired the shot went dark. Its lights flickered and died. Its engines choked into silence. It was left adrift, a powerless hulk. One truth can disable an army. Panic rippled through the scrapper fleet. Vorn stared at the screen, his face a mask of disbelief. What trickery is this? The Steward, for that was its name. A name that now bloomed in the minds of all who saw it was not finished. Its mirrored arrays shimmered, and a second invoice appeared on every scrapper ship's command screen. Item: violation of Concordiate Charter 7. Attempted salvage without a legitimate claim. Fine. The total energy expended by all cutting beams debited from the fleet's shared power reserves. Across the 7 scrapper vessels, engines sputtered. Weapon systems went dormant. Life support switched to emergency battery power. The aggressive, predatory fleet was rendered utterly impotent in a matter of seconds. It had not been destroyed. It had been audited. The Steward had held up a mirror, and the scrappers had been bankrupted by their own actions. Justice is not a weapon. It is a calculation. Aboard the Vindication, the mood was one of profound, earth-shattering awe. They had witnessed a legend come to life. They had seen a power that did not conquer, but corrected. Dr. Zahir was openly weeping, tears tracing paths down his cheeks. Anya Sharma stood rigid, her hands gripping her console, her understanding of tactical reality completely rewritten. Kalen Valerius felt the immense weight of the moment settle upon him. He had not sought a weapon. He had sought to uphold the law, and the law itself had answered. The ancient ship, this steward of judgment, had accepted his petition. It had made him its proxy. Nomos Kalen said, his voice barely a whisper. Update your analysis. The AI's blue light pulsed slowly. The statistical anomaly has become the dominant operational parameter, Nomos replied. All previous probabilities are now irrelevant. Awaiting new orders, Arbiter. We are in the presence of a paradigm shift. The past does not die. It waits to be heard. Aboard the derelict scrapper flagship, a young tech looked out at the glowing Arbiter ship. He had signed on with Vorn for a steady paycheck, a way to escape the poverty of his homeworld. He'd told himself it was just salvage, just a job. But looking at the silent, disabled fleet, and the calm, impossibly ancient vessel that had neutered them without firing a single shot. He felt a cold certainty. They were not salvagers. They were thieves, and they had just tried to rob a god. The steward then turned its attention to the Vindication. A private channel opened a secure link between the two vessels. But it did not transmit a greeting or a thank you or a statement of intent. It sent a single simple query. The message appeared on Kalen's command screen, written in the same stark, foundational script. It was not a statement of fact, but a question of law. Query: the offending parties have been neutralized. Their debt has been recorded. Per Concordiate Precedent 401. Gamma, the disposition of their vessels and crews now falls to the presiding arbiter. Instruct. The choice was his. The ancient ship had provided the means, but it demanded the judgment. It was not a weapon to be wielded. It was a partner in jurisprudence. Kalen looked at the disabled fleet, at the powerless tyrant Vorn, and at the question glowing on his screen. He was no longer just a patrol captain. He was the voice of a power he was only beginning to understand. A reckoning is not an end, but a beginning. His ship was small, his authority limited, but he now held the proxy of a legend. The Scramble's lawless frontier had just found its anchor. Kalen drew himself up to his full height, the weight of millennia settling on his shoulders. The crew of the Vindication waited, their eyes fixed on him. The fate of hundreds of souls and the future of this entire sector rested on his next words. This was the true test, not the awakening, but what came after. Nomos Kalen said, his voice ringing with newfound authority. Record a new log entry. Title, The Charon Precedent. And open a channel to the lead scrapper vessel. I wish to inform Warlord Vorn of the terms of his surrender. The law is silent until a voice is given to it. He began to outline the terms. There would be no executions. There would be no needless destruction. The crews would be interned, their vessels impounded as payment for their crimes. Vorn would stand trial not in a distant Concordiate court, but here in this system with the steward as a silent witness. This would be a lesson, not a slaughter. It would be a new kind of justice for the Maw. Oh. As he spoke, a new challenge emerged on the tactical display. Arbiter Sharma cut in, her voice tense. Multiple contacts emerging from hyperspace at the system's edge. They are not scrappers. Transponders identify them as the Obsidian Anchorage. Kalen's blood ran cold. The Obsidian Anchorage was a legalist cult, a faction of zealots who believed that all pre-diaspora technology was sacred and dangerous. They didn't salvage artifacts. They contained them, often by destroying entire systems to prevent their heretical activation. To them, the awakened steward was not a miracle of law, but the ultimate blasphemy. A harder faith makes a harder fist. The Anchorage fleet was larger than his. It was larger than the scrapper fleet had been. Their ships were stark black vessels, bristling with weaponry. They were not here to negotiate or to salvage. They were here to purge. They are hailing us, Anya reported, her expression grim. On screen, Kalen ordered. The face that appeared was that of Proctor Malachi, a man with eyes like chips of obsidian and a face carved from granite. Arbiter Valerius, the Proctor's voice was a low, dangerous rumble. You have trespassed. You have awakened a power that has slept for ages, a power man was never meant to control. On behalf of the Anchorage, I order you to stand down and prepare to be boarded. The artifact will be sanctified. Sanctified, Kalen challenged. You mean destroyed? A necessary purification, Malachi retorted, his gaze unwavering. That machine is a threat to cosmic stability. Its existence invites chaos. We are the shield against that chaos. Power it down, or we will power it down for you. A closed mind is the most perfect prison. The ultimatum hung in the air. Kalen looked from the proctor's fanatical face to the calm, glowing form of the steward. He was caught between two absolutes, the lawless greed of the scrappers and the merciless dogma of the anchorage. Both sought to control or destroy what they did not understand. A local freighter captain, who had been quietly monitoring the situation from the system's commercial shipping lane, felt his heart sink. He had been thrilled when the old ghost ship woke up and put Vorn's thugs in their place. It felt like the beginning of a new day. Now the black ships of the anchorage had arrived, and the sky was growing dark again. He knew their reputation. They never left survivors who had witnessed a heretical awakening. His hand hovered over the button to engage his FTL drive and flee. Kalen turned to his crew. Anya, tactical assessment. Dr. Zahir, any weaknesses in their doctrine we can exploit Nomos probabilities. They are fanatics, but they are disciplined, Anya said, her hands flying across her console. Their formation is tight, a classic wall of iron. They intend to advance and overwhelm us with superior firepower. Their doctrine is their weakness. Zahir offered, his voice urgent. They believe in textual purity. They follow their founding scripture, the ledger of finality, to the letter. If we can create a situation that their scripture does not account for, we might be able to paralyze their decision-making process. The letter of the law can be a cage. Nomos's voice was grim. The probability of surviving a direct engagement with the Obsidian Anchorage fleet is 1.9%. The steward's defensive capabilities against their specific energy weapon signatures are unknown variables. It was an impossible situation. Kalen had just become the steward of a living legend, only to face its immediate execution. He looked at the query still glowing on his screen, the question of what to do with the defeated scrappers. An idea wild and desperate began to form in his mind. The steward taught by numbers and remembered by ledgers. It had just audited the scrappers. Perhaps it could audit the anchorage as well, but not their actions, their beliefs. Proctor Malachi. Kalen broadcast back his voice, a steady counterpoint to the tension on his bridge. You cite your authority from your ledger of finality. I operate under the authority of the Concordiat. We have a conflict of laws. Fortunately for us, we have a judge. He gestured to the glowing Saint ship behind him. The steward is not a weapon. It is an arbiter. I will submit my authority to its judgment. Will you do the same? The mirror must be offered before it can reflect. Malachi's lip curled in a sneer. You would ask me to submit my faith to a machine, to a ghost of a fallen age. Your blasphemy knows no bounds. Your appeal is denied. Open fire. The Anchorage fleet's weapon ports bloomed with light. Lances of raw, destructive energy far more powerful than the scrappers' cutting beams shot across the void. They were not aimed at the Vindication. They were aimed at the steward. They were here for the heart of the legend. But the steward was ready. Its mirrored arrays, which had been holding the scrapper fleet in a state of energy bankruptcy, reoriented with impossible speed. They did not block the incoming energy. They did not absorb it. They caught it. Each beam of coherent energy was captured, bent, and redirected. It was a gambit of breathtaking audacity. The steward was not just deflecting the attack. It was gathering it. The energy from the anchorage's own weapons was being channeled, funneled through the crystalline conduits on the ancient ship's hull, converging on a single massive emitter at its core. The light grew blindingly intense. A storm cannot be fought, but its lightning can be guided. On the Vindication's bridge, alarms blared. Energy readings are off the scale, Anya shouted. I don't know if it can hold that much power. Kalen held his ground, his faith in the ancient vessel absolute. The steward was a creature of law, and the first principle of law was balance. It would not use the anchorage's power for simple destruction. It would use it to make a point. Then the steward released the energy. But it did not fire a single massive beam back at the anchorage fleet. Instead, it pulsed. It unleashed the stored energy not as a weapon, but as a broadcast, a message. It was a wave of pure information projected across the entire system. It was the complete, unedited text of the Obsidian Anchorage's own holy book, the Ledger of Finality. The broadcast was followed by a second pulse. This one contained a meticulous line-by-line analysis of every action taken by Proctor Malachi's fleet, cross-referenced with their own scripture. Every order given, every weapon fired, every threat made. A final transmission followed, displayed on the main screen of every ship, Anchorage and Concordia alike. It was another invoice from the steward. Item violation of foundational doctrine. Per the Ledger of Finality, Section 9, Verse 4, no true servant shall raise a hand against a vessel of the first law, for their purpose is our own. Fine, a test of faith. The rules you impose on others become your own chains. The Anchorage fleet's weapons suddenly fell silent. Their engines did not die, but their fire control systems were locked. On Proctor Malachi's command screen, a single query now blinked, placed there by the steward. Query your actions, contradict your stated principles. Your ledger demands purity. Prove your conviction. Order your fleet to disengage and honor the text you claim to serve, or relinquish your command to one who will. The choice is yours. The steward had not defeated them with force. It had defeated them with their own dogma. It had held up a mirror to their faith and showed them the cracks in their own reflection. It had turned their scripture into a cage. Proctor Malachi stared at the query, his face pale. His entire fleet was watching. His entire belief system had been turned against him by a silent, glowing machine. To continue the attack would be to admit he was a heretic by his own law. To retreat would be to admit defeat. The silence stretched thick with tension. The fate of the system hung on the choice of a single rigid man. Kalen watched his heart pounding. The steward had given him a reprieve, but the final judgment was still to come. The anchorage had not been disabled, merely questioned, and a fanatic's answer was always uncertain. A path of conviction often leads to a cliff's edge. Proctor Malachi's face, projected on the Vindication's view screen, was a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. The veins on his temples stood out like angry worms. He had been challenged not by a peer, but by a machine, and in the language of his own faith. To him, this was the deepest of heresies, a devil quoting scripture. His voice, when it came, was a low snarl dripping with contempt. The machine tempts us. It twists the sacred words to stay its own sanctification. It is the oldest trick of the great deceiver. All ships execute override command Malachi 0. Purge the logic lock. Fire on my mark. A choice is a revelation of character. A tense silence followed. Aboard the Anchorage fleet, captains and tactical officers looked at their consoles, at the still glowing query from the steward, and then at the override command from their proctor. Malachi 0 was a brute force protocol designed to bypass safety interlocks and force the ship's systems to comply. It was a tool of last resort, an admission that subtlety had failed. It was also a deeply arrogant command. Then a voice broke the silence. It came from one of the Anchorage cruisers, the Iron Vow. Proctor, this is Captain Lorien. My ledger is not a lie. Section 9 is clear. I cannot comply with this order. We must reconsider our position. Malachi's head whipped around as if he were looking at the dissenting ship through the screen. Captain Lorien, you are relieved of command. Your first officer will carry out my order or be charged with mutiny. But the seed of doubt had been planted. On another ship, the Righteous Hammer, a similar message was sent, this time fleet-wide. The machine's query is valid. Our purpose is to uphold the ledger, not to ignore it when it is inconvenient. The Righteous Hammer stands with the Iron Vow. A fleet is not a fist. It is a collection of fingers. The perfect wall of iron began to fracture. 3 more ships declared their refusal to fire. They were not siding with Kalen or the steward. They were siding with their own law. The anchorage, a fleet bound by absolute dogma, was tearing itself apart from the inside. Malachi, seeing his authority crumble, made a final desperate move. His own flagship, the Finality's Gate, began to power its weapons, its systems forced into compliance by the override. "Heretics! You will all be purged. I will carry out the sanctification myself," he roared. Before he could fire, the steward acted again. Its mirrored arrays shifted, focusing a thin, precise beam of light, not energy, but pure information at the Finality's Gate. It was a targeted audit. Item: issuance of an unlawful order in direct contradiction to foundational scripture. Item: usurpation of command authority through coercive threats. Item: attempted destruction of a protected legal entity. Verdict: excommunicated. The script bloomed across Malachi's command screen. The intricate network that connected his flagship to the rest of the Anchorage fleet, a proprietary system built on shared faith and encrypted doctrine, was severed. He was cut off, his command codes invalidated, his authority rendered digitally void. The Finality's Gate was now just a ship, no longer the heart of the fleet. An idea once broken cannot be commanded. The remaining loyalist ships faltered their fire control, suddenly unresponsive to the Proctor's authority. The mutiny was complete, achieved without a single shot fired between them. The ships that had dissented, led by Captain Lorian of the Iron Vow, moved to surround Malachi's flagship, their weapons now cold. A new order was forming in the void, on the Vindication. Anya Sharma let out a long, slow breath she hadn't realized she was holding. He's been impeached by a ghost ship. It did not impeach him. Dr. Zahir corrected, his voice full of wonder. It simply presented the evidence. His own fleet passed the sentence. Kalen watched the scene unfold, a sense of profound responsibility settling over him. The steward was not a passive judge. It was an active participant in the enforcement of law, using the most efficient tools available, truth and consequence. The cost of this victory was not paid in hull plating or lives, but in the shattering of a belief system. The Obsidian Anchorage would never be the same. The Finality's Gate had taken minor scorch damage from its own weapon systems, overloading during the forced override, a small scar proving its folly. A single crack can bring down a temple. He opened a channel to the new de facto commander of the Anchorage fleet. "Captain Lorian, this is Arbiter Valerius. Proctor Malachi has been judged by his own law. His quarrel is over. What are your intentions?" Lorian's face appeared on the screen. He looked weary, but his eyes were clear. "Our intentions, Arbiter, are to put our own house in order. We will return to the Anchorage. A conclave will be called. We have much to discuss." He gave a slow, respectful nod. "It seems we have been blind. We saw a blasphemous machine. We should have seen a teacher." With that, the Anchorage fleet, minus its disgraced flagship, began the slow, deliberate process of turning and withdrawing from the system, their mission of purification abandoned. Now only the crippled scrappers, the silent steward, and the lone Vindication remained. The first battle was over. The real work was about to begin. Kalen's gaze fell upon the disabled fleet of Warlord Vorn, a pack of wolves now declawed and defanged. Justice had been demanded, but it had not yet been delivered. True authority is not taken, it is granted. In the days that followed, the Karen Maw became a courtroom unlike any in the history of the Concordiate. Kalen, acting as the presiding arbiter, used the Vindication as his bench and the steward as his archive. Vorn and his captains were brought aboard the Vindication for their trial. They were not shackled in chains, but seated before a simple view screen. There was no jury of their peers, only the unblinking eye of the ancient ship they had tried to dissect. The steward presented the case. It did not use rhetoric or legal arguments. It simply displayed ledgers. It showed the scrappers' illegal salvage logs meticulously recorded. It played back their own communications where they boasted of their plunder. It calculated the precise market value of the resources they had stolen from smaller prospectors over the years, the ecological damage they had caused, the lives they had ruined. It was a cold, numerical, and utterly irrefutable mountain of evidence. Warlord Vorn, stripped of his power armor, and his bluster could only watch his face turning from red to gray. His entire criminal enterprise was laid bare not by a prosecutor, but by an accountant. A number cannot be intimidated. The young tech from Vorn's flagship, who had been called as a witness, watched the proceedings from the crew quarters of his impounded ship. He saw the cold, hard data scroll across the screen, a final tally of their sins. He felt not fear, but a strange sense of relief. The lies were over. The truth, however harsh, was finally out in the open. For the first time, he felt like the crushing weight of his choices might one day be lifted. The verdict, when it came, was not delivered by Kalen, but proposed by the steward as a legal framework. It appeared on the screen, a new ledger entry: sentence restitution. The vessels and assets of the offending fleet are forfeit. Their value will be used to compensate their victims and to fund the restoration of the Charon system. The crew will provide the labor their sentences served not in a prison cell, but in rebuilding what they have broken. Their freedom is a debt to be repaid. It was a sentence of radical fairness. It was not vengeance. It was balance. Kalen ratified the judgment, his voice echoing in the silent bridge. The judgment stands. The Charon precedent is now law. The best punishment is to build, not to break. In the weeks that followed, the transformation of the Maw was astonishing. Under the watchful gaze of the Vindication and the silent authority of the Steward, the former pirates became a workforce. They used their cutting beams to mine asteroids for materials, their haulers to transport construction supplies. A new lawful colony began to take shape on the system's primary moon, funded by Vorn's seized accounts. The law had not just come to the Maw, it had put it to work. During this time, Kalen and Dr. Zahir dedicated themselves to understanding the Steward. Communication was a slow, arduous process. The Saint ship did not think in words. It thought in relationships between numbers, in probabilities, in the elegant, unyielding calculus of cause and effect. It provided them with access to its archives not as stories, but as statistical data sets. They learned of its creation, one of thousands of anchors of judgment, built during a period of frantic expansion. They were designed as incorruptible seeds of civilization sent into the void to teach the principles of law to new colonies. They were not meant to be commanded, but to be consulted. The Steward remembered every case it had ever adjudicated, a billion lives distilled into a flawless record of choices and consequences. It taught by ledgers and numbers, never by collars or commands, for a law that must be forced upon the unwilling is no law at all. A lesson understood is a foundation laid. One evening, as Zahir was poring over a complex data stream representing a millennia-old water rights dispute, he looked up at Kalen, his eyes shining. "It's the most beautiful legal mind I have ever encountered," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It doesn't just see guilt or innocence, it sees imbalance, and it works relentlessly and elegantly to restore equilibrium." The quiet work of reconstruction was interrupted by the arrival of a new ship. This one was different. It was a Concordiate diplomatic cruiser, the hegemony sleek and powerful, a blade of polished steel and political will. It broadcast its credentials with an air of absolute authority. It carried Legate Rianne Thorne, a senior official from the Concordiate's powerful Committee on Strategic Assets. Kalen knew her by reputation. She was brilliant, ambitious, and utterly pragmatic. She saw the Concordiat not as a body of laws, but as an instrument of power. And a priceless, impossibly powerful artifact had just woken up in a backwater system. The law is a shield for some and a tool for others. Legate Thorn hailed them, her image appearing on the Vindication's screen. She was sharp, her features precise, her smile a carefully calibrated instrument. Arbiter Valerius, she began, her voice smooth as polished marble. You have done the Concordiat a great service. Your handling of the scrapper situation was creative. The committee has taken a great interest in your discovery. I am here to relieve you. We will be taking the asset into our custody for study and integration. The word hit Kaelin like a physical blow. Asset. She called the steward an asset, a thing to be possessed. Legate Thorn. Kaelin replied, keeping his voice even. The steward is not an asset. It is a sovereign legal entity operating under a pre-diaspora charter. It cannot be taken into custody. Thorn's smile did not falter, but her eyes grew cold. Arbiter, with all due respect, you are a patrol captain in a fringe system. I am acting on the authority of the highest levels of the Concordiat government. The relic is too powerful to be left here. It must be secured in a core system where its capabilities can be properly managed. A tool is only as good as the hand that wields it. Kaelin stood his ground. Its capabilities are already being properly managed. It is doing the work it was designed to do, building a lawful society. To move it would be to destroy this entire endeavor. The Charon precedent stands. The Charon precedent is a footnote in a field report, Thorn countered dismissively. My orders are a reality. Prepare to transfer all your data on the artifact. A technical team will be boarding the relic to prepare it for FTL transit. This was the final test. Not against the greed of pirates or the zealotry of a cult, but against the cold, pragmatic ambition of his own government. The conflict triangle was complete. Kaelin's moral line was drawn in the dust of this forgotten system. The AI Nomos calculated the political ramifications of his defiance. And the antagonist was not a warlord, but a bureaucrat, with the full weight of the state behind her. Negative Legate. Kaelin said, his voice ringing with an authority that came not from rank, but from purpose. Any attempt to board the steward without its consent will be considered a hostile act. A line must be drawn or it does not exist. Thorn's face hardened. The diplomatic mask fell away, revealing the steel beneath. So be it, Arbiter. You are relieved of command for insubordination. Your first officer will comply with my orders. She cut the channel. Aboard the Vindication, Anya Sharma looked at Kaelin, her expression unreadable. For a moment, Kaelin felt a surge of doubt. He was defying a direct order from a superior. He was risking his career, his freedom, everything. Anya, he began, she can't relieve you of command. Sir Sharma said, her fingers already flying across her console. Not without a formal review. That's Concordiat Regulation 34-9. She's overstepping her authority. She looked up at him, a flicker of defiance in her eyes. My duty is to this ship and its lawful commander. What are your orders? He had his answer. He was not alone. Dr. Zahir Nomos. Is there a way, can we use her own methods against her? Zahir's eyes lit up with a fierce intelligence. She is a creature of the system arbiter, the bureaucracy. And what is a bureaucracy but a massive, inefficient, often contradictory ledger? The steward is the ultimate auditor. A system's greatest weakness is its own complexity. Kaelin turned to the comms panel. Steward, he said, addressing the silent ship as a partner. Legate Thorn of the Concordiat vessel. Hegemony wishes to assert her authority. She carries orders from the Committee on Strategic Assets. I ask you to review her claim. The request was simple, a matter of legal standing. The steward responded instantly. Its arrays, which had been passively monitoring the reconstruction, shimmered. A tight beam of pure data invisible to the naked eye shot across the space between the Saint ship and the hegemony. It was not an attack. It was a request for records. On the bridge of the hegemony, alarms chimed. "Legate, we're being scanned," a tech cried out. It's pulling our public records, all of them, cross-referencing them with the Central Concordiate Legal Archive. Thorne stood, her composure finally cracking. "Block it. Shut down our public access ports." "We can't," the tech stammered. "It's not hacking us. It's making official, fully credentialed legal archive requests, just millions of them per second." The weight of law is not in its force, but in its volume. Then, the steward delivered its judgment. It sent a single public broadcast open for every ship in the system to see, including the crews of the hegemony, the Vindication, and the burgeoning colony on the moon. It was a ledger. At the top was Legate Rianne Thorne's name. Below it was a meticulously documented list of every procedural shortcut, every ethically questionable order, every minor violation of Concordiate law she had ever committed in her career. It showed how she had used a minor supply crisis to consolidate power, how she had buried a report that was inconvenient to her political allies, how her current orders to seize the steward violated 3 separate clauses of the Concordiate's own first contact protocols regarding sentient non-biologicals. The steward did not editorialize. It did not accuse. It simply presented her own record. It held up a mirror to her ambition, and it was a flawed reflection. Checkmate. Aboard the hegemony, a stunned silence fell. The crew stared at the screen, at the undeniable documented proof of their legate's hypocrisy. Her authority was not just challenged, it was nullified by her own history. The law she claimed to wield had turned and judged her. Legate. Thorne stared at the screen, her face ashen. She had been defeated not by weapons, but by paperwork. Her career, built on a careful manipulation of the rules, had been dismantled by a perfect adherence to them. An edifice of lies collapses under the weight of one truth. Kalen opened a channel one last time. "Legate Thorne," he said, his voice calm and steady. "Your claim has been reviewed and found wanting. The Charon precedent stands. You may leave my jurisdiction." He used the word "my" with a new earned confidence. He did not need to say anything more. A few minutes later, the sleek diplomatic cruiser, its mission a catastrophic failure, turned and slunk away into the blackness of hyperspace, a creature of the shadows, fleeing the light. The system was finally at peace. Kalen Valerius stood on the bridge of his small ship, no longer just a patrol captain, but the arbiter of the Charon Maw, the partner of a living law. He had faced down pirates, zealots, and politicians. He had not won through force of arms, but by placing his faith in a principle. The steward had taught him, and he had learned. He looked out at the Saint ship, its crystalline hull glowing softly in the starlight. Its vast internal arrays, their great work done for now, began to dim, the faint hum of their operation sinking back into a peaceful, resonant silence. On his own console, a new entry in the Vindication's log blinked a formal ratification of the precedent he had established, now recognized system-wide. The future of this place, and perhaps many others, would be different now. It would be built not on the whims of the powerful, but on the steady, unyielding foundation. Law that remembered a law that balanced a law that taught. A law with an anchor. Law is not a sword, but a scale. And when it is perfectly balanced, it is heavier than any mountain, sharper than any blade. It does not need to be wielded, it simply needs to be heard. The anchor holds,